Hello and welcome to Weather Snap. I'm Clare Nasir. It's Thursday, the 10th of November. In a moment, I'll be chatting with Alex Deakin, talking about two huge storms currently affecting North America and how their presence will send ripples across the Jetstream and could ultimately affect the UK's weather into next week. Before that, though, COP27 is in full swing. This year it's in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, with record number of participants from African nations, as well as the least developed countries and small islands, making this COP possibly the second most attended climate COP in history, with Glasgow last year being the most well attended. Well, we have delegates there from the Met Office, and earlier I spoke to climate scientist Tyrone Dunbar.
It is incredibly busy. There are a lot of people here, and it kind of feels almost a little bit overwhelming. So it's not just about the climate negotiations. There are also lots of side events where people are talking about science. They're talking about sustainable development goals. They're talking about charitable work. They're just talking about all kinds of things to do with climate change.
Tell me why you're there.
So I'm out as part of a team of scientists. We've got 5 or 6 Met Office scientists out here, and we're talking about climate science. So we're talking to our peers and colleagues. We're talking to policymakers. We're talking to people from countries all around the world about the type of science that the Met Office is doing, everything we're doing about climate change. I was actually organising an event earlier today. So one very specific thing I was doing out here was leading the organisation of an event about the co-benefits of climate change. So all of the health benefits, all the benefits to transport and the economy you get from whenever you take action on climate change. We're also here to support the UK's delegation. So the UK has sent out negotiators who are actually in the discussions, talking about, how we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the action we'll take on climate change. And the Met Office scientists who are out here are providing technical support for those negotiators. So we're helping them with any questions that they might have.
So climate science is central to the conversation amongst the events that you're actually working on. And there's some big players there as well. I mean, they had the leaders of various nations there earlier, including Al Gore.
That's right. So we were actually doing a poster session yesterday. We were presenting some posters on Met Office science, and Al Gore turned up in the background. Now, he was doing an interview for a TV program, so sadly he didn't come over to learn about the excellent Met Office science that we were talking about. But yes, there are climate celebrities everywhere and there's politicians everywhere.
So just finally, tell me, what would you say is going to be the best outcome of COP27 to be? If you came back home and saw the headline, what would you want the headline to be?
That's a good question. So the big focus of the COP this year is it's all about implementation. It's all about taking what was agreed at Glasgow, the Glasgow Climate Pact, and trying to actually make that happen. There's also a big focus on adaptation because it's a COP in Africa. So there are loads of discussion about adaptation here and finance as well. So a lot of the African countries, developing countries, are really pushing other countries to pay money towards helping them adapt to climate change. So I think what would be a brilliant outcome is if we could really push forward and come up with some concrete plans for how countries are actually going to implement the agreements that we've made to start making the changes that we need to make to reduce emissions so that we can still keep things like the 1.5 degree target in reach.
My thanks to Tyrone Dunbar for talking to me live from Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27. So last year was COP26, Glasgow. Alex, we were both there, weren't we? The weather obviously very different to what they're experiencing in Egypt right now.
Yeah, had a great time in Glasgow. First time I've properly kind of been there. Beautiful, beautiful city. My phone's been throwing up memories from a year ago, quite a bit over the past couple of weeks. Really interesting time to experience a COP, in person, be there for the first full week to see so many, scientists mixing with, decision makers, policy makers, government officials. It was an incredible experience. Feel very lucky to have been there.
I was there as well. I couldn't actually get in on the first day. Security wouldn't let me in. So I was just hanging out with everybody outside the venue. And that was an incredible atmosphere as well. Obviously, there were protesters there, but there was a bit of a festival atmosphere as well. People really just coming together from all corners of the country as well as the world. And yes, it was really good to experience. We do have people heading to COP right now for the discussions next week, and we will be talking to Pete Falloon next week. about food systems and climate change. That'd be really interesting. But now let's turn our attention to North America. And it's the first winter storm of the season, gripping Canada and the northern side of the US. Now, forecasters are warning of a whole array of extreme weather just across a huge region, from whiteout conditions with blizzards to severe thunderstorms. Alex, the latest, it's massive, isn't it? And it's at the moment, and we're talking Thursday afternoon here, continuing to develop.
Yeah, really intensifying this cold plunge. I mean, it's not that unusual, I guess, to have these huge systems, but it's early in the season, the first of the season, for the first of the season to be so big. I guess that's one of the unusual things. It's going to be a bit of a shock to the system as temperatures, are dropping by 10, 15 degrees in the space of 24 hours. This part of the world, particularly, over parts of the Rockies, it's not that unusual to see those kind of big drops. But yeah, just because it's the first of the season, I think, and it is impacting on so many different levels. We've got blizzards across the north, but further south, you're going to have some very heavy rainfall that could cause some flooding, strong winds in places as well, just exacerbating the snowfall. And I think by Friday into Saturday, that cold front will extend all the way from the Great Lakes, if not a little further north into Canada, all the way down to Texas. So, as you say, it is a huge weather system bringing a big change, the first proper cold blast of the season.
I was looking at temperatures across southern Canada earlier on this week. Minus 17 degrees Celsius is a max. I mean, what would we do here in the UK if we saw that as a temperature? We'd all go and hibernate, but it's business as usual.
Yeah, and in November as well, it's not even the coldest, nowhere near the coldest time of year. We do a forecast, don't we, for Alberta every day, and that's where I get a lot of information, just checking that temperature range. And even a couple of weeks ago, it was plus 20, plus 25 even, and now to be minus 20 as a high is just an incredible switch around. So they do get these switches pretty regularly. They're kind of used to it, but it's still always a bit shocking to see, and it's particularly for that first cold blast of the season to be so extreme. Temperatures in Alberta across Western Canada are picking up a little bit over the weekend behind this cold blast, but like you said, across the central part of the USA, those temperatures are really going to be dropping through today, and more particularly during Friday.
Yet something else happening, which is equally as interesting, not great for the people who are actually living across the eastern side of the US at the moment. But we do also have ex-Hurricane Nicole moving its way northwards. And now this is quite unusual because it's the end of the hurricane season, and we saw a tropical storm sort of track towards the Bahamas where it dumped a lot of rain. And then it deepened further into a Category 1 hurricane as it made landfall just south of Vero Beach in Florida early on Thursday. Sustained winds are around 75 miles an hour, according to the National Hurricane Center. But even though, yes, it's not like the last one, which hit Florida in late September, that was Hurricane Ian, which was a Cat 4 verging on Cat 5. CNN are still reporting that 188,000 homes and businesses across Florida are without power through Thursday morning, and 1,200 flights have been cancelled. So yes, the state is in still a recovery sort of mode after that hurricane late September. And now this tropical storm, which was a Cat 1 just for a time, is producing a huge amount of rain and also strong winds across central Florida. And it's moving its way northwards. And that's the key thing. So we've got this cold wave pushing down from Canada. And then we've got this ex-tropical storm pushing its way along the eastern seaboard, and at some point they're going to meet, Alex.
Yeah, you're going to get a huge clash. You've got that warmth coming in from the southeast and that cold coming in from the northwest. It really will be a battleground as those two come together. It's worth pointing out, actually, Orlando is going to see a lot of heavy rain during this 24 hours from that system. And Orlando did see a lot of rain, a lot of flooding from that system Ian as well. So though they're coming in from different directions, that central part of Florida, again, seeing torrential rain. But yeah, that huge contrast with the warm tropical air coming up from the south, hitting this cold plunge, it really will be the battle of the Titans as those two clash, and they're going to develop into a really angry looking area of low pressure. Obviously won't be a tropical system anymore. It'll transition into a fairly standard low pressure system, but it's still going to pack a punch because of that contrast, because that's what drives a lot of our weather. It's the contrast. If you've got cold air hitting warm air, it really energizes the atmosphere. It spins it up, turns it into a rain-making machine as it tracks its way up the eastern side of the US, and it's going to move pretty rapidly as well, because that's energizing the jet stream as well. So the jet stream is powered by that contrast. So when you get these huge contrasts, cold air coming down from the north, warm air coming up from the south, where they clash, it energizes the jet stream. That in turn can generate further circulations and invigorate the low pressure system itself. So yeah, high energy systems across the United States generating potentially some really serious weather for the next few days, actually, because that system, Nicole, will work up the eastern seaboard through the weekend and still be around as we go into Saturday and Sunday.
So they're talking impacts right now, transport mostly, obviously large accumulations of snowfall, blocking roads and rail, freezing rain, causing problems on power infrastructure, and obviously exposure to blizzards always poses a risk to life. And we've got that added flash flooding. So there's everything in the mix there. Talking about severe thunderstorms, really just very, very violent weather across initially around a third of the whole of the USA. And then, as you say, becoming more confined to the northeast. But you just talked about the jet stream there, Alex. And this is really interesting because we're not an island, even though we are an island. Our weather obviously happens because of what's happening thousands of miles away. And this is an interesting setup meteorologically because you've got that cold air and that tropical air clashing, which obviously reinvigorates the jet stream. And that means repercussions down the line a few days later. So what do you think it has in terms of implications for the UK?
This is something we talked about on the 10-day trends video, which you can obviously check out on our YouTube channel. That's the one we do every week. We're looking at the trends into next week. And that is one of the things that's happening in the United States, but it is going to empower and invigorate the jet stream. That's why the jet stream gets more active in autumn and winter compared to spring and summer. That's why our weather is more changeable and we see more low pressure systems through this time of year, because the jet stream gets invigorated, because the Arctic gets colder and the tropics still warm. So you get that bigger contrast. But when you get this huge clashes that we're going to see across the United States, that really can, take the jet stream up to an extra level. And that's what we're going to see. Now, it looks like it's going to drive its way across more western parts of the Atlantic through the early part of next week. And the peak winds within that core of the jet are really going to liven up and get to some of the highest levels that we could see through the autumn months. And then that position of the jet stream slightly shifts. It picks up areas of low pressure and it sends them across the Atlantic. We may even get the same low that's no longer Nicole, but won't be by the weekend. But we may well get the remnants of that low pressure coming right across the Atlantic, because the jet stream is going to be so active it could push it right across. And we're certainly looking at low pressure systems coming in throughout the early part of next week, chopping and changing and mixing our weather up to turn it much wetter and windier. There is a big caveat at the moment, though, because right now across Europe, there's a big fat area of high pressure, and that's a blocking high, and that is stopping the low pressure systems coming in. And that's the big question mark next week, as to whether the jet will be empowered enough to actually break down that high pressure system, or whether the lows will kind of just grind to a halt, almost building up to the west of the UK. And it's how much impact, how far in they get, that's the big question mark for next week's weather. But it's certainly something we'll be keeping a very close eye on. And it could be quite an interesting week of weather next week, with the potential for this wet and windy weather to come in. But whether it actually makes it all the way across to the UK, well, that will depend on just how active the jet stream is and how strong that block is further east.
It's funny, isn't it? Well, not funny really, but every day when you sort of embark on your day of looking at meteorology, the jet stream is probably a go-to, and it's something we blame on lots of different types of weather. But where the jet stream is, you can almost define what's going to happen on ground level, even though it's sort of 8 miles in the air. So at the moment, the jet stream is to the north of and the west of the UK. So we're on what we call the warm side of the jet. And that's just sort of pushing up the most incredible warmth. I mean, exceptionally mild, which is something which I don't think we've seen at this level for a long, long time. Shall I just tell you about the records that could be broken over the next few days, Alex?
So the jet stream at the moment is, like you say, just kind of stuck pointing towards the northwest of the UK. So it's taking the low pressures up to the northwest, but it's kind of not really moving very far. And it is acting just like a conveyor belt. But it's up to the northwest of the UK. So we're on the warm side. And we're getting these southwesterly winds that are drawing up the warmth practically from the tropics, certainly from beyond Iberia down through Madeira even. That's where the warmth is coming from. That is why we're seeing these incredibly high temperatures. Not much is shifting at the moment until we get that change next week, which will in some way be initiated by Nicole. But yeah, we even call this, don't we, in meteorological terms, a conveyor belt of moisture, because the jet stream just isn't moving very far, and it's translating this warmth up from the southwest. And of course, southwesterly winds, they're going to bring warmth, but they're also going to bring moisture because it's coming in over the Atlantic, which means it's predominantly cloudy. But where we've got that weather front, that moisture means rain, and heavy and persistent rain across northwest Scotland, while we've got had a yellow warning in place for there as well. So really interesting weather setup at the moment.
Yeah, I stepped out at 5:30 this morning to walk my dog, and I just couldn't believe the temperature. And I live in the northwest of England, where it's cloudy and quite cold a lot of the time. But in fact, some of these records have been around for quite some time. So we're talking November statistics here across the UK. The highest minimum temperature in November in Northern Ireland currently stands at 13.9 degrees Celsius in Armagh, but that was set in 1947. So it's a good chance we'll see that broken over the next 24 hours. And the highest min in November in Scotland is actually 14.5 degrees, which is balmy. And that was set in Dice, which is Aberdeenshire, in 2007. So both of those records possibly could be broken through the next 24 hours. So we're talking Thursday here, so into Friday. But on Friday, which is Armistice Day, we do have a separate set of numbers, separate set of statistics just for this day alone. And 17.8 is the warmest Armistice Day ever recorded in 1977, quite aptly at Kensington Palace. But also Colwyn Bay in Wales saw 17.8 on the 11th of the 11th in 1954, which is actually my daughter's birthday. Not 1954, but the 11th of the 11th. So it's a good one to remember. Good one for the family to remember.
I was going to say, you don't look old enough to have a daughter born in 1954. Claire.
One thing I think we like to throw around this sort of setup, Alex. Okay, come on. We're going to go back to sort of, forecasting school here, is the Föhn effect. And we love talking about the Föhn effect, particularly in this sort of setup where we've got quite a strong wind and it's moisture laden as well.
Yes, it's going to be fascinating to see what those temperatures do over the next 2, 3, even 4 or 5 days, because the weekend remains incredibly mild. Yeah, we don't normally do records for individual days, do we? But for certain, historic days or significant days in the calendar, like Armistice Day, it's easy to pick out those records. So we wouldn't say have individual records for the 13th of November, but Armistice Day, obviously a significant day. So we do have individual day records for that. So yes, some of those day records are at threat, and those nighttime temperatures quite complicated because it's the highest nighttime temperature, but it's not necessarily nighttime temperature. It's the highest minimum temperature between 9 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock in the morning. So there are some nuances around just how we make those records. But yeah, make sure you're following the Met Office on Twitter, and then we'll be keeping you updated as to whether we break any of those records over the next few days. But yeah, the Föhn effect is where you've got winds coming over a mountain or hills, and as that air comes down the other side, it's been modified. It's lost some of its moisture because it's formed in clouds or rained over the top, and as it comes down the hill the other side, air descending warms up more rapidly than air rising. And so on the other side of the hills, the lee side, temperatures can often be significantly higher than they are on the windward side. I would call it the windward side. But yeah, so I'm going back to school. It's been a few years.
Compression.
Also, often on the lee side, it's sunnier as well. You've lost that cloud, so it can be sunnier. So there's 3 or 4 reasons why the temperatures on the lee side of hills and mountains are higher, but they can be significantly higher. And yeah, that is the Föhn effect, or the Föhn effect. Föhn effect. You say Föhn, I say. And
so what's your money on tomorrow then?
See.
What's your money on Friday? What do you think? The highest temperature and where? Come on.
I think the Moray Firth is a classic example of where we're going to see that. So that kind of north-facing coast of Scotland, we've got southwesterly winds going over the Cairngorms there, and come down the other side, and it's significantly warm. We've got a few obs sites there as well, because that's crucial. We have to have a site that we recognise as a given temperature, and there's a few sites there that could easily get up to 17, maybe 18 on Friday. So probably that's the warm spot. Into the weekend, however, I think we may see the highest temperatures in North Wales. The winds shift a little into north, not more of a southwesterly, more of a southerly, in parts of North Wales to the side of Snowdonia may well see the highest temperatures, possibility of 20. So, pushing November records, not just the 11th of November records, possibly. And again, it really will be those nighttime temperatures that are most noticeable.
Colwyn Bay still might just have another record in November. You never know. Well, that's really interesting, Alex. First, another thing, just before you can go back to your day job. I know you love talking to me. I do. I know you do. Tell us about.
My day job. I love.
Yeah. Tell me about the weather for the weekend, because it's really wet currently across the northwest of Scotland. And in fact, up to the first week in November, we've seen a lot of rain across central and eastern areas of England, almost 100% of its monthly average already in some parts of East Anglia and the southeast. So, what's happening?
Much drier for eastern England. I think we're not going to see much rain at all. There might be a bit of drizzle just because it's going to be misty and murky and dank, and that's something we haven't seen much of throughout this autumn, actually. So we've got this really strong southwesterly wind at the moment, that conveyor belt we talked about, bringing that heavy rain in northwest Scotland. We will see subtle changes as we go through the weekend. The winds will ease a little bit and shift to more of a southerly wind direction, which means that with the winds easing, it could turn quite misty and murky, because it's the strong winds that are helping to keep the mist and fog at bay. So slightly lighter winds will allow it to turn a bit misty and murky, something we haven't seen much of. It might be thick enough for a bit of drizzle here and there, but generally looking a lot drier. We will have this weather front across Scotland and Northern Ireland. It pushes south initially, so the northwest does become drier, and then pushes back further north during Saturday. But as it does so, it will be weakening. So most places, Scotland and Northern Ireland, have a bit of rain Saturday. Otherwise, it's looking like a largely dry weekend, but big question marks about how misty, murky, how much cloud there is in the bottom layer of the atmosphere, which, sometimes the models have difficulty with. And that will be the biggest issue this weekend, because where that mist and fog does clear, if you see some sunshine, okay, the sun's pretty weak at this time of year, but because it's so mild, temperatures could really jump up. Add on the Föhn effect, we could see temperatures in the high teens, perhaps even up to 20 Celsius somewhere like North Wales. But where it's grey and dank, it will be mild technically, but it won't feel all that pleasant. And that's what many people will see. But I guess the good news, what you said earlier, is that heavy rain that we've seen of late across eastern England will have eased. But of course, is that really necessarily good news? Because it has been so very dry there recently that actual rainfall we've seen in November has been quite welcome, helping up topping up river levels. And then into next week, that mist and fog could still be around on Monday morning before we look at that shift that we talked about earlier with that Jetstream powering in, with potentially some wet and windy stuff coming in from the west.
Alex Deakin, you're a diamond. Thank you so much. Just great information delivered just so eloquently with so much passion. Always good to have you on the show. Really appreciate it. And interesting times. And thank you very much.
My pleasure, Claire. Thanks for having me on.
Just before we go, let's head over to Ollie Claydon with last week's highs and lows.
Here are your weather extremes for Monday the 31st of October to Sunday the 6th of November. The warmest place last week was Monday, Halloween, with a high of 18.4 Celsius in Cardiff, Wales. The lowest temperature was in the early hours of Saturday morning in Aboyne, Aberdeenshire, with a low of minus 3.8 degrees. The wettest place was Kew Gardens, London, where 42.8 millimetres fell on Thursday the 3rd of November. And the highest daily sunshine occurred on Thursday at Aldergrove, County Antrim, and also on Friday at Waddington, Lincolnshire, both receiving 8 hours.
Thanks, Ollie. That's it for Weather Snap. I'm Clare Nasir and editor is Adrian Holloway.
Weather Snap is a podcast by the UK Met Office. For the latest weather conditions where you are, download the Met Office weather app.